Well, shalom. My name is Todd Bennett, and this is the audio version of the weekly newsletter sent out by Shema Yisrael.net. It's titled The Time of the Harvest, A Time to Prepare. It was originally published on day 5 of month 2, also known as May 7th, 2022 on the Roman calendar. We're in an important period between two feasts that are focused on bread. We started off by restricting ourselves to unleavened bread, and practically speaking, that unleavened bread would have involved grain from the prior year's harvest. We then started counting on the morrow after the first high Sabbath of unleavened bread, and we were counting all the while we were eating unleavened bread. And we're counting days and weeks, as we discussed last week, up until the Feast of Weeks, which is Shavuot in Hebrew. Now we know that we count weeks because of the following text in Deuteronomy 16, 9 through 10. You shall count 7 weeks for yourself. Begin to count the 7 weeks from the time you begin to put the sickle to the grain. And that is the morrow after the Sabbath, when the high priest would present an omer of the barley, and that would actually begin the harvest. So that was the time when they begin to put the sickle to the grain. Then you shall keep the Feast of Weeks to Yahweh your Elohim with the tribute of a freewill offering from your hand, which you shall give as Yahweh your Elohim blesses you. Now, if you still have difficulty understanding the count, I suggest the article that I wrote titled When Do We Celebrate Shavuot? And you can find that on the ShemaYisrael.net website. Many refer to this count as the omer count, or the counting of the omer, because it begins with an omer offering, that first barley. Some translations called a wave sheaf offering, but the sheaf is actually omer in Hebrew. And we understand that omer offering is given on the beginning of the count because of Leviticus 23:15, and you shall count for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath, and this is talking about the first high Sabbath, from the day that you brought the omer of the wave offering. Now, did you notice the aleph tah, the which was connected to the omer? The omer is a dry measure, and it is intimately connected with the manna. We read about the manna in Exodus 16:16. This is the thing which Yahweh has commanded. Let every man gather it according to each one's need, 1 omer for each person, according to the number of the persons. Let every man take for those who are in his tent. So the omer was the portion of manna for each person. Of course, Yeshua specifically connected himself with the manna through his teachings. And we read in John the following. Then Yeshua said to them, Most assuredly I say to you, Moses did not give you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of Elohim is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Then they said to him, Master, give us this bread always. And Yeshua said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. But I said to you that you have seen me, and yet do not believe. All that the Father gives me will come to me, and the one who comes to me I will by no means cast out. For I have come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. This is the will of the Father who sent me, that of all he has given me, I should lose nothing, but should raise it up at the last day. And this is the will of him who sent me, that everyone who sees the Son and believes in him may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up at that last day. So the manna had a physical benefit that provided nourishment and sustenance to people on a daily basis. And it also had a very spiritual implication through the Messiah. And this is the case with most of the lessons in the Scriptures. Just because they have a spiritual message does not mean that we neglect the physical rehearsals in obedience. And that's the mistake that much of Christianity has done. So we need to be counting, and when we count omers, days and weeks, we should be thinking about the sufficiency and provision afforded to those in the covenant. We should also be celebrating the fact that we understand the fulfillment of this rehearsal through Yeshua. The count begins with an offering made by the priest from the new barley crop, as we already mentioned, the Reshit offering. And the count continues through the grain harvest and concludes with the Bikurim offering of all the people, and then 2 loaves of leavened wheat bread are waved before Yah. Here's the commandment from the Septuagint. It says, "And you shall count for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 weeks shall be completed. Count 50 days to the day after the 7th week. Then you shall offer a new grain offering to Yahweh. You shall bring from your dwellings 2 wave loaves of 2/10 of an ephah. They shall be of fine flour. They shall be baked with leaven. They are the first fruits to Yahweh, the Bikurim. And you shall offer with the bread 7 lambs of the first year without blemish, 1 young bull, and 2 rams. They shall be as a burnt offering to Yahweh, with their grain offering and their drink offerings, an offering made by fire for a sweet aroma to Yahweh. Then you shall sacrifice 1 kid of the goats as a sin offering, and 2 male lambs of the first year as a sacrifice of a peace offering. The priest shall wave them with the bread of the first fruits, the Bikurim, as a wave offering before Yahweh with the 2 lambs. They shall be set apart to Yahweh for the priest. And you shall proclaim on the same day that it is a set-apart convocation to you, a Kadosh Mikra. You shall do no customary work on it. It shall be a statute forever in all your dwellings throughout your generations." So, as we continue to count, Yahweh is keeping our focus on grain and bread, as we see that this count culminates with 2 loaves of leavened bread. And the reason for this is because bread was traditionally the staple of everyone's diet. People would make fresh bread every day, and it was a lot of work. Of course, most people living in Babylon barely give bread a second thought. They just grab a loaf in the grocery store. It comes free at dinner at their local restaurant, and most of their fast food comes on a bun or in between slices of bread. Very few actually make their own bread anymore, and as a result, they can lose the significance of this very important exercise. We began this entire exercise focused on Egypt and the deliverance from slavery. One of the primary events that involved the enslavement of the Egyptian people was described in the story of Joseph, involving a 7-year famine. After the famine began, Joseph was revealed to his brothers in the tribe of Israel, the 12 sons and the father, and their families moved to Goshen at the behest of Joseph. Or I should say the 11 sons, because Joseph didn't have to move in, and he probably had a different dwelling place with his family. Well, here's a portion of the account. "And Joseph situated his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. Then Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all of his father's household with bread according to the number of their families." Now, there was no bread in all the land, for the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the grain which they bought, and Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. So when the money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us bread, for why should we die in your presence? For the money has failed." Then Joseph said, "Give your livestock, and I will give you bread for your livestock if the money's gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for the horses, the flocks, the cattle of the herds, and for the donkeys. Thus he fed them with bread in exchange for all their livestock that year. When that year had ended, they came to him the next year and said to him, "We will not hide from my master that our money has gone. My master also has our herds of livestock. There's nothing left in the sight of my master but our bodies and our lands. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread." and we and our land will be servants of Pharaoh. Give us seed, that we may live and not die, that the land may not be desolate." Then Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for every man of the Egyptians sold his field, because the famine was severe upon them. So the land became Pharaoh's. And as for the people, he moved them into the cities, from one end of the borders of Egypt to the other end. Only the land of the priests he did not buy, for the priests had rations allotted to them by Pharaoh, and they ate their rations which Pharaoh gave them. Therefore they did not sell their lands. Then Joseph said to the people, "Indeed, I have bought you and your land this day for Pharaoh. Look, here is seed for you, and you shall sow the land. And it shall come to pass in the harvest that you shall give 1/5 to Pharaoh." That's 20%. 4/5 shall be your own, as seed for the field and for your food, for those of your households, and as food for your little ones. So they said, "You have saved our lives. Let us find favor in the sight of my master, and we will be Pharaoh's servants." And Joseph made it a law over the land of Egypt to this day that Pharaoh should have 1/5, except for the land of the priests only, which did not become Pharaoh's. Now it was through this event that Pharaoh ultimately ended up owning everything in Egypt, except for that owned by the priests, including the people, all because he had inside information and he acted upon it. It was like the Great Reset being pushed upon the world that promotes the notion that you will own nothing and be happy. That's just a slick marketing campaign for global enslavement, and they want to do exactly what Joseph did. They want to move everybody into the cities and get them out of the country, and so they can control them. Well, interestingly, the Egyptian people went to Pharaoh for their daily bread when the money failed. They had no money left because they spent it all on food. And we're currently witnessing the demise of the dollar as the world reserve currency. The money is inflating and it's failing. And everyone reading this should take note. Someday your money will be worthless. That's a guarantee. The U.S. dollar, otherwise known as a Federal Reserve note, is a debt instrument. It will go the way of all fiat currencies, which is total collapse. There's an interesting distinction that we can glean from the passage, though. The children of Israel did not need to go to Pharaoh for their bread because they were provided bread from Joseph. Joseph prepared, so they did not need to buy or sell. As a result, they did not become the slaves of Pharaoh, at least not at that time. Well, guess what? You've got inside information as well, if you have eyes to see and ears to hear. Severe food shortages appear to be right around the corner. And the question is, are you prepared? Are you even trying to prepare? Are you being supplied bread from Joseph? Now remember that Yeshua the Messiah was the adopted son of a man named Joseph, and that was no coincidence. Yahweh planned it that way to send us a resounding message. A similar message was provided by the fact that Yah named his son Yeshua, which is, in English we call it Joshua, but we know it's Yeshua. Remember the guy who came out of Egypt with Israel? He was first a servant of Moses and then elevated to the commander of Israel. He led them through the waters of the Jordan into the covenant land and circumcised them. He officiated over the first Passover in the land and the transfer from the manna to the grain of the land. He then destroyed the moon worshippers at Jericho and proceeded to conquer the land. You see any patterns there? But I digress. Yeshua said that he came for the lost sheep of the house of Israel, which is Joseph. He also instructed us to pray for our daily bread. In other words, we do not need to buy from Pharaoh when we receive our daily bread from Yahweh. Now consider the count that we're in. Today is day 20 in the count. So we are literally in the midst of the grain harvest. And those of us who grow up in Christianity tend to spiritualize everything. But if we were in the covenant land, truly rehearsing, we would be working our butts off to ensure that our families had enough grain to provide our daily bread for the entire year. So this period was a time of planning and preparing, harvesting, and gathering. And ultimately, the focus was to store up plenty of grain safely and securely so you could draw from it throughout the year. You wanted to store up as much grain as possible. And, this would be called prepping nowadays, but it was just part of everyday life for people in the past. It was not a demonstration of a lack of faith to prepare during this time. Indeed, it was a necessary and integral part of life, and it was expected of people to do that. Just because they arrived in the covenant land, it did not mean they didn't have to work. Yahweh stopped the manna when they got to the land. The manna was only for the wilderness, when they were on the move and not permanently settled. Once in the covenant land, the people needed to obey and the people needed to work. There are incredible lessons embedded within the rehearsals that revolve around the harvest. If you stayed in your home during this time while everyone was working, you would be considered a fool. Proverbs 10:5 says, "He who gathers in summer is a wise son. He who sleeps in harvest is a son who causes shame." There was specific labor required at specific times, and it all integrated together. Indeed, if you did not plow and plant seed, you would have nothing to harvest. Proverbs 24 says, "The lazy man will not plow because of winter. He will beg during harvest and have nothing." In other words, the old adage, you reap what you sow. If you don't sow anything, you're not going to reap anything. Now, this brings up an important time when we consider the winter, plowing in the winter, and then harvesting in the summer. We talk about springtime. The ancients did not recognize it as a unique and separate season. The month of the Abib was the time we refer to as spring, but it was really the transition between winter and summer in ancient times. Here was the promise given to Noah: "While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease." The scriptures are clear that there are only two recognized seasons built into creation. In Psalm 74 we read, "The day is yours, the night also is yours. You have prepared the light and the sun. You have set all the borders of the earth. You have made summer and winter." And now, did you notice how the summer and winter are repeatedly compared to the day and the night? That's because they both follow the same pattern built into creation. Just as the daily cycle has night and day, the yearly cycle has winter and summer. The transition between night and day, known as dawn, could be likened to spring, the transition between winter and summer. And the transition between day and night, known as twilight, could be likened to fall, when the summer is ending and we're going into the days of darkness of winter. That's why we celebrate the harvest feast of Sukkot at the end, also referred to as the Tekufa, or turn. We read about that in Exodus 23:16 and 34:22. It's at the turn of the year when we're transitioning from summer to winter. Summer's ending and winter's beginning at the Feast of the Ingathering. There we celebrate the fruit harvest and to consider all of the bounty that Yahweh has provided during the summer harvest. We have a great celebration and traditionally pray for rain at the end of Sukkot as we contemplate plowing and preparing for the next cycle of harvest. The Israelites' lives were focused and centered around food. They had to be. And Yahweh even pegged his appointed times to their harvest. So he was all for it. He wanted them to work hard and stay on course and, of course, on schedule. That's why I stress the calendar and the appointed time so much. I spent the first half of my life in a religious system that was completely oblivious to the schedule of the Creator. In fact, my religion specifically placed me out of sync with Yahweh and taught me to keep pagan holy days, often referred to as Christian holidays. We need to get into the rhythm and timing of the Creator and His creation, and this is why it's important to think like a Hebrew and view creation in patterns and cycles. I was recently reviewing some of my Leaving Babylon video scripts as I'm working on the book Leaving Babylon. Some of them are right on topic, and if you haven't seen them, you may find them helpful, particularly understanding Hebrew thought and understanding the calendar. And you can find those on YouTube, my channel on YouTube, under the Leaving Babylon series. I said all of that simply to make the point that much of what we learn in the scriptures has a physical aspect that we walk out in real time. We cannot and should not spiritualize everything as some of us have been taught. When we pray, give us this day our daily bread, the purpose is not so a couple of slices of toast miraculously appear on our breakfast plate every morning. The prayer is all encompassing. We pray that He provides us with the needed rain to grow plentiful crops that yield a bountiful harvest. And we want peace and security so that our storehouses remain filled and undisturbed. We then need the strength and patience to grind our grain into flour. We need fresh, clean water to mix with our flour, time for the dough to rise, and we need fire to cook it. There are many factors involved in getting our daily bread, and we ask for Yahweh to be involved in it all. Otherwise, we're going to need manna. Ultimately, I believe that there may come a time when we will do just that, and when He will do just that and provide it for us, but until then, we must be wise and remain steadfast. Like I said, the manna is for the wilderness. It's not for the lazy. When I grew up in Boy Scouts, the motto was, always be prepared. And it's good advice. I'm getting ready to head back to Texas tomorrow, where we are still planting and building infrastructure, and we're preparing the best that we can. And by the way, for people in South Texas, there's no question about what time it is. It's summer for sure. And if you don't believe me, just ask my wife. Speaking of South Texas, it's really amazing to see the difference from last year. While there was an abundance of rain last year at the beginning of summer, much of the Southwest is now in drought. This would not be a good sign for people in ancient times, and it's not a good sign now. Drought leads to famine. And there's a delayed response in modern culture due to the supply chains, and most people won't understand the problem until it's too late. That is because they are so detached from the cycles built into the creation. When the store shelves are empty and the food is unavailable, many may find themselves in the position of the 5 foolish virgins. Remember how the foolish say to the wise, give us some of your oil. The wise tell them, no way, we might not have enough. Go get your own. And I'm paraphrasing. Here's the portion of the parable from the scriptures. Then the kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now 5 of them were wise and 5 were foolish. Those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them. But the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. But while the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight a cry was heard, behold, the bridegroom is coming, go out to meet him. Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. But the wise answered, saying, no, lest there should not be enough for us and you. But go rather to those who sell, and buy for yourselves. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding, and the door was shut. Now, this parable has a much deeper meaning than just olive oil, and it refers to light, not food, but it provides a stark warning regarding preparedness. I want to be counted among the wise, and my prayer is that I not only have oil for light, but I want to have extra food to help those in need. Actually, we've been doing that for years. Inflation and lack take their toll on the poor first, and usually the hardest. And just so you know, things have been rough in Africa for a long time, and they're getting much worse. We help orphans in a Torah-based community in Africa, and I get my information firsthand. I just sent more funds for food yesterday, as a matter of fact. Next month, I'll be involved in the Battle Cry event that is raising funds for widows and orphans with the goal of helping them self-sustain. And you can follow the link or go to the Magic Yah website to find more information. Here's what we may all expect in a not-so-distant future. According to Revelation 6, 5-6, when he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, come and see. So I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine. Another way that this can be interpreted is a quart of wheat for a day's wage, and 3 quarts of barley for a day's wage. This is describing inflation, and people are barely going to be able to sustain on their wages. And there's a message implied here. If you're counting on wages to pay for food, you may find yourself getting squeezed. On the other hand, if you work for yourself or grow your own food, you might reduce or minimize the impact of inflation, particularly as it applies to food. Also, did you notice the directive not to harm the oil and the wine? The oil comes from olives and the wine comes from grapes. These are both associated with the fruit harvest around the time of Sukkot. So there's going to be a distinction between these two harvests, the grain harvest that starts with the barley and then the wheat, and the fruit harvest. And of course the availability of the produce associated with them, it also appears there will be a distinction there. This may mean that the famine is short-lived, but it could also be describing the effects of an agricultural breakdown. Today, grains are largely produced on large-scale industrial farms that require seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides on a massive scale each season. They also utilize vast amounts of fuel and machinery and large-scale transportation and supply chains. This is all starting to come unhinged as I write this message. So it could be that the grains that we're reading about are on these industrial farms that are just breaking down, and so they're going to be harder to get. The grapes grow on vines and the olives grow on trees, and typically manageable vineyards and groves. They can continue to produce without much intervention. They don't need to be replanted and refertilized every year if they're planted in good soil. So while there may be reduced grain supplies, the olives and the grapes can continue unhindered. Sadly, people dependent upon wages will not get beyond the grain, and that is a physical matter with some very spiritual implications if you understand the appointed times. Speaking of olive oil, I was visiting with some friends several days ago in their home, and as we sat and talked at their kitchen table, they brought out some homemade olives in garlic and oil. And for those unfamiliar with olives, you cannot simply pick them from a tree and eat them. Like most fruit, olives must first be processed. You need to pick them after the rains to ensure that they have sufficient oil in them, and you then need to brine and culture them before they can be eaten. My friend told me his technique, and they were definitely way better than store-bought olives. And as we sat and ate the olives with bread and cheese, we were talking about the importance of preparing, and it made me think of Joseph and the mark of the beast. I was always put in fear of the mark of the beast as a child because I didn't understand, what it was all about. And the threat of the mark of the beast is that no man can buy or sell without taking a mark. And we read about that in Revelation 13:16-7. It says, he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Well, here we go again with buying food. If you need to buy food, you're going to get caught in a predicament. Well, what if you don't need to buy or sell anything? What if you grow your own olives, crack them, cure them, and brine them? What if you worked hard to prepare and grow your own food? If you were self-sufficient, you wouldn't need to buy or sell. And of course, your diet would be much simpler with a lot less variety, but maybe that would be a good thing. I think many of our health issues come from the fact that we eat so many processed foods and foods out of season that our bodies never calibrate properly. The GMOs and such, I think, are causing all these digestive problems, leaky gut and celiac disease and all that. So maybe we're better off just growing our own food and eating our own food. And I've heard that they're going to change labeling, so we're not necessarily going to even know things about our food in the future. Well, we know that Babylon breeds dependency on the beast, and Babylon tantalizes our taste buds for sure, just like Egypt did with the Israelites. Despite the fact that Yahweh was providing them with daily bread miraculously through the manna, it wasn't good enough for everyone who departed Egypt. Recall the reaction of the mixed multitude? The scriptures say, now the mixed multitude who were among them yield to intense craving. So the children of Israel also wept again and said, who will give us meat to eat? We remember the fish which we ate freely in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our whole being is dried up. There's nothing at all except this manna before our eyes. Now the manna was like coriander seed, and its color like the color of bdellium. The people went about and gathered it, ground it on millstones, or beat it in a mortar, cooked it in pans, and made cakes of it, and its taste was like the taste of pastry prepared with oil. And when the dew fell on the camp in the night, the manna fell on it. Well, the manna sounds delicious to me, but we're all used to variety, and our cravings could be our undoing. So it's best to get control over your fleshly desires now before the real testing comes. Like I said earlier, there may be a time when we require the miracle of his daily bread from the heavens, his manna. The question is whether that will be good enough for you and satisfy your cravings. Will his portion, the omer of manna, be sufficient? That's one of the questions to consider as we count the omer and focus on bread all the way to Shavuot. So keep counting and keep preparing, because it all leads us to a wedding at the mountain of Elohim. More on that next week. Barakot, my name is Todd Bennett from Shema Yisrael.net. Shalom.